On a quiet afternoon, the hum of a classic car echoed through the streets of a small town. Behind the wheel sat Mr. Harris, a wealthy businessman, with a sharp suit and an even sharper temper. He was already late for an important meeting, and as fate would have it, his prized 1969 Camaro sputtered to a stop right in the middle of a neighborhood he barely noticed before. Frustrated, he slammed the door and popped the hood, muttering about wasted time and broken engines. But then something unusual happened. From down the street, a little girl no older than 10 pedaled up on her rusty bicycle. Her curious eyes studied the scene, and without hesitation she called out, "Mister, do you need help?" At first, Mr. Harris almost laughed. What could a child possibly know about a car like his? But there was something in her confidence, the way she hopped off her bike and walked toward the hood, that made him pause. He didn't realize it yet, but this simple encounter was about to change not just his day, but his entire outlook on life. Mr. Harris stood with his arms crossed, watching as the little girl set her bicycle against a fence. She walked straight up to the Camaro with a look of quiet determination, not the wide-eyed curiosity he expected. "It's your carburetor," she said matter-of-factly, peering under the hood. He blinked in surprise. "My what?" The girl didn't flinch. "Carburetor. It's not getting enough air. My grandpa showed me this trick, watch." Before he could stop her, she darted off to her porch and returned carrying a small red toolbox, its paint chipped from years of use. She pulled out a wrench that looked far too heavy for her tiny hands, and yet she handled it like she had done this 100 times before. With quick practiced movements, she tightened one bolt, adjusted another, and tapped the side of the engine with the handle. Mr. Harris, still skeptical, opened his mouth to warn her, but suddenly the Camaro gave a low growl. She grinned, turned the key he had left in the ignition, and the car roared back to life. His jaw nearly dropped. For a moment, he was speechless, staring at this child who had just done what even he couldn't manage. "How on earth do you know all that?" he finally asked. She shrugged, wiping her hands on her jeans. "My daddy was a mechanic. Grandpa says I've got his hands." There was no boast in her voice, just quiet pride. Mr. Harris felt a strange lump rise in his throat. He had thought he was meeting just another kid, but standing in front of him was someone far wiser and far stronger than her age suggested. As the Camaro's engine settled into a steady rumble, Mr. Harris couldn't take his eyes off the little girl. She leaned back against her bicycle, catching her breath, as though this was just another ordinary afternoon for her. But then something caught his attention, a thin chain around her neck glinting in the sunlight. Hanging from it was not a charm or a toy, but a worn piece of metal. He leaned closer. It wasn't jewelry at all. It was a soldier's dog tag. His voice softened without him realizing. Where did you get that?" The girl looked down, her fingers brushing the tag gently, almost reverently. "It was my dad's," she said quietly. "He was a mechanic in the army. He promised me he'd come back and teach me everything he knew, but he didn't." Her eyes drifted away for a moment, and Mr. Harris noticed how carefully she held that tag, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. She continued, her voice small but steady. "Grandpa says Dad would be proud of me. So I wear this every day to remind me that he's still here helping me." For a long moment Mr. Harris stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. Here was a child who had already carried loss greater than most adults could bear, yet she smiled through it, fixing cars with the confidence her father left behind. He felt something stir in his chest, guilt, admiration, maybe even shame. All his wealth, all his success, and yet he had never seen resilience quite like this. And for the first time that day, Mr. Harris didn't just see a little black girl, he saw a daughter carrying her father's legacy in the simplest, most powerful way. Mr. Harris cleared his throat, trying to mask the heaviness in his chest. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a crisp bill, and held it toward her. "For your help," he said. But the girl shook her head, immediately stepping back, as though the money were an insult. No, sir. Daddy always told me real help doesn't need payment. Her words landed harder than she could have imagined. For the first time in years, Mr. Harris felt humbled. Slowly, he slid the bill back into his pocket, and instead pulled out a sleek embossed business card. "All right then," he said softly, pressing it into her small hand. "If you or your family ever need anything at all, you call me." She nodded, tucking it carefully into her pocket, as though it were a secret treasure. Days passed, and Mr. Harris thought often about that little mechanic with the dog tag. Then one evening his office phone rang. On the line was a trembling voice, her mother. With hesitation she explained their situation. Overdue bills, the threat of losing their home, and no way out. The next morning, without hesitation, Mr. Harris was there. He settled their debts quietly with no grand speeches, only a reassuring smile. But he didn't stop there. He saw the determination in the mother's eyes, the same spark her daughter carried, and offered her a job at his company, steady, respectable work that could rebuild their lives. For the first time in a long time, Mr. Harris didn't feel like just a wealthy man. He felt like someone who had finally invested in something that truly mattered, people, not profits. And in that moment, he realized the little girl hadn't just fixed his car, she had fixed something in him too. Weeks later, Mr. Harris found himself sitting behind his polished desk when a soft knock came at the door. To his surprise, it was the little girl standing proudly beside her mother. She walked up, clutching something in her hand, and placed it gently on his desk. It was a small worn wrench, clearly old, clearly loved. "This was my dad's," she said with a bright smile. "But I want you to have it so you'll always remember who helped you." For a moment Mr. Harris couldn't speak. He picked up the tool, feeling its weight heavier than any deal he had ever signed, more valuable than any treasure he had ever bought. Slowly he smiled, his voice warm but unsteady. "I'll never forget, kiddo. Not you, not your father, not what you've taught me." The girl beamed, and her mother's grateful eyes met his in silent thanks. As they left his office, Mr. Harris leaned back in his chair, the wrench resting in his palm. He realized that life wasn't measured by meetings or money, but by moments of kindness that leave a mark on the heart. And from that day forward, whenever his Camaro purred to life, he no longer thought of it as just a car. It was a reminder of a little mechanic with a big spirit, and the lesson she carried, that sometimes the smallest hands can make the greatest impact.